After returning to the practice field on Sunday, the Seahawks face a critical Thursday night contest against the Cowboys and dwindling playoff hopes that they'll be looking to keep alive. Do the Seahawks still have hope to get back to the postseason and even compete for the NFC West title? We'll be breaking it all down on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, here on our Monday episode by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to all the 12s out there, whether you're listening in nearby Tumwater in the land of Nick Lee or across the country in Richmond, Virginia. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. On today's episode, we're going to have our Monday mailbag. We'll be answering Seahawks and NFL questions from you, our valued listeners. And we're going to take a look behind enemy lines against a very talented Dallas Cowboys squad, what to expect on offense and defense, some familiar faces both on the field and on the sideline going into this contest at AT&T Stadium. It's going to be a jam-packed episode brought your way by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now for your lead story here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. After dropping their third game in 4 tries against the 49ers on Thursday night, the Seahawks now are only a game over 500 and barely clinging to their playoff lives. Currently, Rob holding the number 7 seed in the NFC with a 6-5 record. And don't look now, but they have a couple teams that are closing in on them, behind them, most notably the Los Angeles Rams, who beat the Seahawks twice this year. They are now only a game out of the win and loss column behind the Seahawks, gunning for one of those wild card spots. The Green Bay Packers just upset the Detroit Lions. So I guess the big question that many fans are asking, how did we get to this point? How did the Seahawks suddenly have an offense that can't score touchdowns? How did this team that started off 6-3, now suddenly they've kind of unraveled here the last 2 weeks? I guess the real question is, where are we at on the panic meter here entering week 13 for the Seahawks with 3 really tough opponents coming up? They've lost 2 in a row, 3 out of 4. Where are you at on that pain meter spectrum, that panic meter spectrum for the Seahawks?
Corbin, I think it's appropriate that we are having this conversation just a few days after Thanksgiving. My wife and I hosted Thanksgiving. I remember putting the turkey in the oven and watching that little pressure meter kind of pop when the turkey is cooked. And my spot on the panic meter, it feels like that pressure cooker, that pressure little gauge is about ready to pop in terms of where I think that the Seahawks are at this stage of the season. If they don't get this victory this week against the Dallas Cowboys, a very formidable opponent. The Dallas Cowboys have won 13 consecutive games in Dallas. Then I do think that the Seahawks season will essentially pop like that turkey pressure meter, because as you said, the Green Bay Packers and the Los Angeles Rams are playing really good football right now. Jordan Love looked like the star young quarterback that the Green Bay Packers selected him in the first round a couple of years ago, to be. And then the Los Angeles Rams look absolutely dominant against the Arizona Cardinals this weekend, and in large part because both of those teams, again, the Green Bay Packers having very good play from their quarterback, and the LA Rams are just kind of taking back the identity that the Seahawks used to have, and that being running the football. And, again, that's where LA was so dominant against the Arizona Cardinals. Looked like Kyron Williams and Royce Freeman both were absolutely not Royce Freeman, but now I'm spacing on his name. But anyways, the LA Rams didn't matter who they put in at the running back position. They were both spectacular for them. And again, that's the reason why my personal panic meter for the Seahawks is very, very high at this point, because I do feel like they have to go into Dallas, win that football game just to essentially hold serve, because the teams on their heels are fast gaining on them.
Yeah, it's interesting because when we were having this conversation a few weeks ago, the Seahawks were hovering around an 80% chance to make the playoffs. And that was assuming that they were going to go to LA and get that win. If they would have beaten the Rams and improved to 7-3 at that point, with the way the rest of the conference has been unfolding, they would have felt really good about their chances of making the postseason, but they lost in LA, as we know. And then obviously the 49ers came to town and whipped them at Lumen Field on Thanksgiving night. And so now they're just one game above 500. And you look at the standings, because the Seahawks have lost both their games to the Rams at this point, according to the New York Times, the Rams actually have a higher playoff odds opportunity right now at 37% compared to the Seahawks 34%, because they own that tiebreaker, winning both of those divisional games. So Seattle right now would be the team in the playoffs, but the Rams have positioned themselves with an easier schedule as well here down the stretch. They've positioned themselves to make a run for that playoff spot. And the Seahawks now, they are going to have to play near perfect football to try to hold off these teams, at least in terms of getting wins and avoiding losses, because they've allowed those teams to sneak up behind them when they had an opportunity to create some of that cushion. And the worst part, as you mentioned, Rob, is the schedule, the upcoming schedule for the Seahawks. We've talked about it ad nauseum since it came out in May, that this was the gauntlet for the Seahawks. And they've got to play at the Cowboys, at the 49ers, and versus the Eagles now. 3 consecutive weeks. And the 49ers, I guess if there's a silver lining here, they've got to play at Philadelphia, then they get a rematch with Seattle. So they've got a couple of difficult games coming up as well. But look at the Rams. They've got the Browns without Deshaun Watson. They play the Commanders. At Ravens is obviously a really tough game, but the schedule is set up where Seattle clearly has the toughest schedule ahead of them to try to get back to the postseason. And losing some of the games they have given themselves little margin for error at the worst time in their schedule. With that being said, I'm going to dish it over back to you. What is the one reason that you have hope that the Seahawks team can't get back to the playoffs? Everything considered, how poorly they've played as of late, what's the one reason you have hope they can get back to the playoffs?
History of Pete Carroll, to me, is the easy answer to that, Corbin. I mean, you think back, and everybody, we had the panic meter out in week 1 when the Seahawks lost that game against the LA Rams, and everybody was freaking out. And then, in my opinion, Seattle's most impressive victory so far this season was that road victory at the Detroit Lions in week 2. Now, of course, the Seahawks are playing the Dallas Cowboys, as I mentioned before, 13 consecutive games that the Cowboys have won, an awful lot of familiar faces. And I don't just mean the coaches, I mean players as well. Awful lot of all pros, big names out there. Oh my goodness, the fearful Dallas Cowboys, team that hasn't gone to the Super Bowl, much less won it since 1995. So again, that the reason why I still think that this is a winnable game and a return to the playoff opportunity for the Seahawks is just because the fact that we have not in the Pete Carroll era seen the team just suddenly fall off a cliff like what some are suggesting might be about to happen, because they do have such a terrible gauntlet of football games here. If they can just pull off this victory here against Dallas Cowboys, I think that the confidence of this team is suddenly going to skyrocket. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I think that this is as big of a must-win game as the Seahawks have faced now for a couple of years. But if they can muster this victory, then I do think that they will build up the confidence that they need, and I think that they also obviously is going to send a message to their own locker room and to the rest of the NFL that the Seahawks aren't going to go silently into that dark night.
If there's a reason for optimism from my perspective, it's that Abraham Lucas, we're hoping, is going to be back on Thursday night. And right tackle position, there's been 3 different starters since Lucas went down. None of them have played even close to the level that Lucas is capable of. And it's been a valiant effort by all those guys, but they have given up almost 40% of the pressures that have gone to Geno Smith, according to PFF. And so they need Abraham Lucas back in there. And I think just his return would help the rest of that offensive line. I'd like to see some of the young guys, maybe Oluwatimi time at center, but they've got to do something there. But that is a reason that I have some optimism. If you can get a little better protection, some of those longer developing plays that Shane Waldron seems to want to call in the passing game, you're going to have a better chance of hitting those if there's a little bit better pass protection. So that would be my reason for optimism, is just that the offensive line still hasn't been 100%. And now you're going to be getting one of your better players, Abraham Lucas, hopefully back this week against the Dallas Cowboys. Other than that, it's tough because the offense has been struggling so much, but you do know the talent is there. They just have not been able to put it together, but maybe the offensive line getting healthier would be the missing ingredient to make that happen. Up next, we're going to answer your questions on our Monday mailbag. Don't go away. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, which is brought your way by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. When I was managing a site over at SI, LinkedIn Jobs was my go-to to post writing positions to land top candidates, and they made the process easy and seamless. All you have to do is create your job post and add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word you're hiring. They offer simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Now a word from our sponsor, BetterHelp. Life can be full of twists and turns and throw a few wrenches at you when you least expect it, so it's important to show yourself through it all and put a focus on your mental health. BetterHelp Online Therapy will assess your needs and can match you with your own licensed professional therapist in less than 48 hours. Therapy worked wonders for me when I was battling depression earlier in my professional career, but don't just take my word for it. Having someone in your corner to guide you when you're struggling to navigate obstacles can be invaluable. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional therapy done securely online, available to people worldwide. With therapy, it can take a few tries to find the right fit for you, and BetterHelp is a great way to invest in yourself. BetterHelp has an offer for our listeners, 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's 10% off your first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/lockedon. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Coming up on tomorrow's show, second straight week, it's Matchup Tuesday with the Seahawks having a Thursday night game. We will continue this recent trend of moving our matchup-oriented show to Tuesdays. We'll be breaking down all the key matchups and positional battles to watch when the Seahawks travel to Dallas to face the Cowboys. You won't want to miss it. We got a ton of mailbag questions from you, our valued listeners, so let's get to them. This first one for Rob, and this one is coming from another Rob out there, Rob Roberts on X. In your view, is it possible to be a Super Bowl contender without a solid offensive line? Pete and John have had many years to assemble a solid O-line and for the most part have failed. Is that a fair assessment?
I think it is a fair assessment. I think that, as you mentioned, Corbin, just a moment ago, the Seahawks, the fact that they haven't had Abraham Lucas, I think, is one of the reasons why Seattle does not have a solid offensive line so far this season. But to the initial part of the question, and again, thank you so much to all of you, even those of you who's also named Rob, for asking these questions and supporting us on the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Simple answer is no. I don't think that it's possible that you can have a legitimate Super Bowl contender and not have a quality offensive line. I just think that the pass rushers in today's era of the NFL are just too darn good. I think that you can be good. I think that you can win some football games, but I think that when the football gets really tough in the cold months and in the playoffs, I think that's where the weaker offensive lines are going to get, are going to just get destroyed. And oftentimes the quarterbacks along with them.
Yeah, I would be in agreement. I don't think you have to have like a top 5 offensive line necessarily, but you can't really get away with having a bottom half of the league offensive line and have any chance of advancing deep in the playoffs. It's just extremely difficult, even if you have the most athletic quarterback in the world. Our next question from Joey Easterbrook on X: given the performance of the offense and the difficulty of the upcoming schedule, how likely is it the next 3 games will define Shane Waldron's tenure in Seattle? I don't think it's just going to define his tenure. I think it's going to determine whether or not he is back next season. You know, there was a lot of talk before the season about Shane Waldron being a head coaching candidate. I think that attention certainly is no longer being directed his way with the way the offense has struggled for most of this season, especially the last 4 or 5 games. But yeah, this is truly going to be a defining stretch for him because you got some really good defenses. The Dallas Cowboys, other matchup with the 49ers, the Philadelphia Eagles, all teams that are capable of doing a lot of damage with their pass rush, creating turnovers in bunches. They're well-coached teams. So, yeah, the ball is in your court, Shane Waldron. You need to show what you're made of. This has not been a great season, even a good season for the play caller. He's been under fire, and justifiably so. So these next few games, he is going to be calling plays for his job in Seattle. This is no longer about trying to look attractive to other teams as a head coach. This is just trying to survive in advance in Seattle because Pete Carroll has shown he will get rid of offensive coordinators after 3 seasons. He's done it the last few times that he's had OCs. With Darrell Bevell got rid of him, and then, of course, Brian Schottenheimer 3 years. That seems to be about the hit spot with these offensive coordinators. So these are going to be 3 big games coming up for Shane Waldron that really are going to define his upcoming time in Seattle and really the season for the Seahawks. Our next question from Alex Hernandez: could Derek Barnett offer any type of help on the edge for Seattle? Barnett was cut by the Philadelphia Eagles, former first-round pick.
I think that he could. I don't think that he's going to provide enough. I think that it's something that the Seahawks may want to kind of kick the tires on. I was encouraged by the fact that Seattle went and signed the cornerback Kelvin Joseph, former second-round pick of the same Dallas Cowboys, here just on yesterday, I believe it was. And so I'm encouraged by that the Seahawks are still looking around and trying to bring in some players. But at the same time, I think that they tried basically this approach already with Frank Clark. Obviously, the big trade for Leonard Williams. I think at this point, it's all about kind of, rather than trying to get the talent, the veteran players out there to try to improve your own team, I think that you got to kind of invest in the young players that you've already drafted. I think you got to see more from Darrell Taylor, certainly. You've got to see more from Derek Hall as well. You got to see a return to the dominant fashion that we saw at Boye Mafe. That 7-game sack streak feels like a month and a half ago at this point. So to me, rather than going for some of the other veterans that are out there, especially one who is, unfortunately not the same player that he was for all of those great years, the Philadelphia Eagles, I really think that the Seahawks need to be focusing on developing their younger players rather than bringing in players that are a little bit past their prime.
D-Hogs on Threads writes: what are your thoughts on Frank Reich as a replacement for Shane Waldron? Well, that was fast, about as fast as the amount of time that Frank Reich was in Carolina. So I will say this: we don't know what the future holds for Shane Waldron. And as I just answered on a previous question, these next 3 games are going to go a long way towards determining whether or not he is on the Seahawks coaching staff next year. But if things don't turn around enough where Shane Waldron is able to maintain his job and Pete Carroll decides to go a different direction, I would love to see Frank Reich come to Seattle, because I think he is one of those coaches who hasn't had a great track record as a head coach, but as an offensive coordinator, we've seen him work with young quarterbacks. We've seen him work with veteran quarterbacks. So you could put him with Geno Smith. You could put him with an incoming rookie. You could put him with both. And I would feel really confident with his ability to be able to develop those players. It's unfortunate that the Panthers gave up on him as quickly as they did. I don't feel like he really had a fighting chance with how much they broke that roster down going into the season. But I still respect him as an offensive coordinator. If he was one of the options that the Seahawks were considering, I would be excited about bringing him in, because I think he is still an excellent play caller. Head coach, I don't know that he's going to get another opportunity to do that, but he certainly knows how to call plays. We've seen it in the past in Philadelphia. Our next question here, Zach A. Washington off of Threads. Do you think we could see the Seahawks run 6 O-line sets like they used to do with George Fant now that Abraham Lucas looks to be coming back?
I'd love to see some of that. I really think that, again, I think the Seahawks do just about anything that they can possibly do to regain the physicality that used to epitomize Seahawk football. I just have kind of bemoaned the fact that Seattle has now gone to more of a passive passing attack. And to me, that is just not what is successful in today's NFL unless you have a legitimate all-pro quarterback. And look, Geno Smith's a good player. Don't get me wrong, but still, it just feels like Seattle has tried to shift to this more of an up-tempo, downfield passing attack rather than the smash mouth football that has always been kind of the hallmark of Pete Carroll's success. And so that to me is where I have kind of struggled with, Pete Carroll, Shane Waldron, and the lack of offensive identity. So I do encourage the idea of Seattle just adding more bodies to the line of scrimmage and playing the kind of physical football that I think, again, is more successful, especially in the cold, wintry months of December and January.
And our last question here, Carl Freeberg off of Threads. How can the Niners still have salary cap space? When does their bill come due? This is a question that Seahawks fans always have about the 49ers. They had it about the Rams for a number of years. We've seen that bill come due for them a year ago and some of the players that left this last offseason. But for those that are worried about the 49ers just seemingly having endless cash, there's two things that are going to end this and make this bill come due. First is Nick Bosa's extension is going to kick in next year. That is going to eat up a lot of money for the 49ers on their salary caps. They will have to make some moves to offset that. And then Brock Purdy, next year will be his third season in the league. Right now, he's playing on a rookie deal as a 7th-round quarterback, so he is an absolute bargain, even more so than Russell Wilson was as a 3rd-round pick for the Seahawks. But he's going to be eligible for an extension after next year, and assuming he continues to play at a high level as their starter, they're going to have to fork over the cash. They're going to have to pay him money. So that is going to be the ultimate thing that is going to make the bill come due, and they're going to have to get cheaper at other position groups. But that's still a little over a year away, so the 49ers still have the ability to have some flexibility next year. But if Purdy keeps playing well, they have to pay him. That's really going to be what ultimately is the game changer for the 49ers with their salary cap. Up next, we're going to take a look at Seattle's next opponent, the Dallas Cowboys, on the road on Thursday night, back-to-back Thursday night games. A Cowboys team that's coming off of a 45-10 whipping of the Washington Commanders. They are flying on all cylinders right now. Going to be a tough game. We're going to look at what to expect from the Cowboys on offense and defense when we come back here on our Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks, which is brought your way by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. You don't have to battle thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. It's just you picking more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections to watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is really simple to play. I can make my picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. And the best part right now, if you are a football and basketball fan, they've got combo projections, football and basketball in the Specials League, which is created for combo projections of 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, I can have Steph Curry and Tyler Lockett at 10.5 3-pointers plus receptions. If you want to play alongside a celebrity like rapper Meek Mill, you can find those people into community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Prize Picks is an absolute blast, and it's an easy way to enjoy daily fantasy without the hassle and land quick winnings. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use the code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. You're listening to the Monday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s. Thank you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Don't forget tomorrow, Matchup Tuesday, the top positional battles to watch, Seahawks versus Cowboys, offense and defense on both sides of the ball for both teams. Going to be a really fun episode. Make sure you're listening in. We'll be going live at our usual time at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Speaking of those Dallas Cowboys, they are coming off a monster win over the Washington Commanders, a game that was actually pretty close for about 2.5 to 3 quarters, and Dallas really turned it on in the fourth quarter, squashed the bugs, so to speak. Washington had some turnovers, and then things just unraveled. But this is a football team, Rob, that they don't have a win against anybody with more than 4 wins this year, but at the same time, they are as dominant as anybody when they are clicking on all cylinders, and they've been playing great football as of late, in particular on the offensive side of the football. Just scored 45 points against the Washington Commanders on Thanksgiving Day. Dak Prescott is wheeling, dealing, not turning the ball over the way that he did last year. They've got several stud receivers. They've got a great offensive line to protect him, a solid run game, one of the more explosive offenses out there. This team is just plain loaded on offense. And former Seahawks offensive coordinator Brian Schottenheimer is doing a great job getting the football to all these guys, scheming it up and making life easier for Dak Prescott.
You know, it really is. You certainly got to give some credit to two former Seattle coordinators. Brian Schottenheimer on the offensive side of the ball, Gus Bradley on the defensive side of the ball. It's really remarkable what Dallas has done on offense first. I mean, they lead the NFL 31.5 points per game. So again, their offense is just the best in all of the NFL. What's interesting about it is the fact that they are kind of one-dimensional in a way when it comes to passing attack. Basically, 2 out of every 3 balls that Dak Prescott throws goes to CeeDee Lamb, and yet they've basically been unstoppable in that way. Their number 2 receiver right now is actually the tight end, Jake Ferguson, rather than the wide receiver, Brandon Cooks. I think that might surprise some people out there. At the same time, on the defensive side of the ball, Gus Bradley, for the 3rd year in a row, has the Dallas Cowboys in the top 10 in defense. It's a lot easier when you got guys like Micah Parsons out there rushing off the edge. He's been absolutely spectacular. 11.5 sacks so far in 11 games. That basically says it all right now. They are 4th in the NFL in points allowed. Again, as I mentioned before, 1st in points scored, 31.5. 4th in points allowed at 16.8. When you are scoring twice as many points as the opponent, things are pretty easy. And oh, by the way, one of the biggest areas of concern that we've had for the Seahawks, of course, all season long is 3rd down on offense, 3rd down on defense. The Seahawks are in the 5 worst on both sides of the ball. The Dallas Cowboys are 2nd best on both sides of the ball in terms of 3rd down conversions. The Dallas Cowboys might just be the best all-around team that the Seahawks have faced so far this season, Corbin, considering the whipping that the Seahawks took at Lumen Field against the 49ers a week ago. That's pretty scary opportunity here for the Seahawks to face.
Yeah, I never looked to correct you, but Dan Quinn is the one that's the defensive coordinator for not Gus Bradley. So Gus Bradley is doing a really good job in Indianapolis. The Colts are playing some really good defense, but this, Pete Carroll's just got a lot of former assistants that are out there doing a really nice job coaching around the NFL. But from an offensive perspective, when we're looking at this team, Dak Prescott last year, there were actually some murmurs coming out of Dallas about, is he the guy long-term for us at quarterback? Because he had interception issues a year ago. Kellen Moore ends up getting fired, and he winds up with the Chargers as their new offensive coordinator. Been kind of a slippery slope for him in LA, but Brian Schottenheimer gets that next chance to be the offensive coordinator. He had 3 straight years where the Seahawks were a top 10 offense. He's having the same type of success in Dallas. And what is fun about this offense, and this shouldn't surprise anybody that watched the Seahawks with Brian Schottenheimer calling the plays, they are in the top 4 in explosive play percentage. They are taking their shots downfield. They did it against the Commanders. They've been doing it against everybody for the most part. They're taking their shots. This passing game is built around air yardage, where they are 2nd in the NFL, and they're doing a lot of it out of shotgun with heavy 11 personnel groupings. You're going to see a lot of 3 receiver, 1 tight end sets. Right now, they're around 61.4% of their snaps that they are playing in 11 personnel. And most of their success this year has come from shotgun. And so Brian Schottenheimer, if that sounds familiar, that sounds like the blueprint that he had working with Russell Wilson in Seattle for 3 years. And so he's been able to replicate that with this Cowboys offense that has a very similar toolbox of skill players to what he had in Seattle at his disposal.
No, exactly. And that to me is one of the things I think it's got to be very frustrating for Seahawks fans out there. It's just to see the way that Schottenheimer and Dan Quinn, my apologies to both Quinn and to Bradley and Seahawks, Cowboys and Colts fans out there for getting those 2 fantastic defensive coordinators confused here. But again, that's one of the things that's going to be frustrating to Seahawks fans is the way that Dallas has replicated what the Seahawks used to do, the physicality on both sides of the ball. As you mentioned, the 11 personnel, using all of their receivers and really featuring the running game, the way that the Dallas Cowboys having a quarterback who is as dangerous on his feet as he is in the pocket. And then on the backside, on the defensive side of the ball, again, you have a spectacular player, Micah Parsons. Sure, that makes things a lot easier. But when you have a very good edge rusher in DeMarcus Lawrence on the other side, when you have speedy linebackers that behind him, when you have a strong safety who looks like a linebacker himself in Jaron Kearse at the strong safety position, who looks very similar to Cam Chancellor, of course. When you have a playmaking cornerback, a couple of them, the way the Dallas Cowboys have, a couple of years ago was Trevon Diggs, who led the NFL and had multiple touchdowns off of pick sixes. This year, it's Deron Bland, a 5th-round pick from Fresno State, similar to Richard Sherman, played on the West Coast. Of course, at Stanford was a 5th-round pick that was, of course, known for his ball hawking skills for the Dallas Cowboys. There are so many similarities between what the Dallas Cowboys are doing at an exceptional level this year and what the Seahawks did all those years ago.
Yeah, and the defensive side of the ball, Dan Quinn is doing a lot of the things that he did when he was the defensive coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks when they were making those Super Bowl runs. And it starts with the pass rush up front. They've got a ferocious pass rush there with Micah Parsons, DeMarcus Lawrence, some of the other interior linemen that they have. They can rotate some guys in there, and they mix and match. They run a lot of cover 1 man, more than what the Seahawks did with Dan Quinn. Still a pretty cover 3 heavy team as well. So you're going to see some cover 1. You're going to see cover 3. You're going to see a lot of those middle of field closed concepts, but they're going to mix and match when they do man and when they go into their zone schemes. And this team is actually right now in the top 12 in blitz percentage. So even though the Cowboys have really good defensive linemen and pass rushers, Dan Quinn is still being aggressive, and he's still sending guys from multiple levels of the defense with those athletic linebackers, some of the guys they have in the secondary that can blitz as well. So this is not going to be a game where this is a 2013 Seahawks defense and they're just dropping guys back in coverage and rushing 4. This team will send 5 or 6, maybe even 7 guys after you frequently to speed up the clock for the quarterback. And with the pass rushers they've got, that means that you have very little time to react, and the Seahawks have had their issues in recent weeks dealing with blitzes. Just ask the 49ers. So Dan Quinn's going to be looking at this game, his former team, and I'm expecting plenty of aggressiveness, sending players from all levels of defense, mixing up those man and zone looks, primarily middle of field closed, and just being aggressive. That is the nature of Dan Quinn, and his football team executes that aggressiveness quite well on the defensive side of the football. As always, you can follow me on Threads. I'm not on Twitter anymore. On Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Subscribe and follow Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Don't forget, tomorrow it is Matchup Tuesday. Rob and I will be breaking down all the key matchups to watch when the Seahawks travel down to Dallas to face the Cowboys. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Thanks for listening in, and go Hawks.